At the edge of Pine Hollow, Oregon, a 38-year-old Navy SEAL walked through an abandoned rail yard with a German Shepherd who refused to turn back. The old train car ahead was rusted shut, forgotten by the town, and marked for demolition by morning. Ryan Cooper only came to inspect the tracks. He did not come looking for a reason to stay. But then the German Shepherd stopped at the door, pressed her nose to the cold metal, and from somewhere inside came two tiny cries. Were they trapped? Were they alone? And why did the dog keep leading Ryan deeper into a place everyone else wanted torn down? When the door finally opened, Ryan found more than two helpless puppies. He found a secret tied to a blue ribbon and a truth the town had buried for decades. This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Morning came softly to Pine Hollow, Oregon, with a thin, silver rain hanging over the roofs and the pine trees breathing mist into the valley. The old rail yard sat beyond the last row of houses, where the town seemed to lose interest in itself, and the weeds took over with the patience of small green kingdoms. Rusted tracks ran into tall grass, then vanished under blackberry vines, as if the railroad had once tried to leave and simply grown tired. Ryan Cooper stood at the locked gate with a clipboard in one hand and a canvas field bag over his shoulder, wondering why places that had been abandoned always looked less broken than people did. Ryan was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, in the quiet, practical way of a man trained to move through danger without asking it to announce itself. His dark brown hair was cut short, with the first hints of gray near the temples. A trimmed beard sharpened his jaw, though it could not hide the tiredness around his eyes. People in town would have called him handsome if he had given them enough time to look, but Ryan rarely did. His face had learned to close before anyone got comfortable. He wore a faded green jacket over a plain gray shirt, work boots darkened by rain, and the careful expression of a man who had returned from service with all his limbs and not all of himself. He had come to Pine Hollow for one reason: inventory the old rail property before the county sold it to a demolition company. Count the broken switch stands, mark unsafe structures, photograph the remaining equipment, send the report, leave. 3 days, maybe 4. No dinners at friendly kitchens. No long conversations with men who wanted to ask about war after their second cup of coffee. No neighbors bringing pie and expecting a smile in return. Ryan had learned that kindness could be dangerous. It made doors inside a man open, and some rooms were better left dark. The town had hired him through a veterans work program, though hired sounded more generous than it was. The pay was modest, the job temporary, and the rail yard was considered too useless for anyone else to care. That suited Ryan. Useless places did not ask questions. They did not need saving. They certainly did not look at him with his younger sister's eyes. He pushed open the gate and stepped inside. The hinges gave a long complaint, like an old church lady judging a scandal from the back pew. Ryan paused, almost smiling, despite himself. Then the smile disappeared before it fully arrived. The yard stretched ahead in damp silence. A collapsed freight shed leaned to one side. Grass grew through the tracks. Farther back, nearly hidden behind reeds and scrub pine, sat an old train car with peeling green paint and a sliding door eaten dark by rust. Ryan marked the shed first. Roof unstable, south wall compromised. He took pictures, made notes, measured a gap in the siding. Work steadied him. Numbers were safe. Rot was honest. A beam either held or it did not. Human beings were more complicated. They could sound fine on the phone and be gone before you called back. He was kneeling beside a cracked rail plate when he felt it, the prickle at the back of the neck, the small animal knowledge that he was no longer alone. Ryan did not turn quickly. Fast movements told watchers too much. Instead, he lowered the measuring tape, rested one hand on his knee, and looked across the grass. A German shepherd stood between two rusted barrels near the freight shed. She was beautiful in the ruined, weather-beaten way old paintings were beautiful after surviving a fire. About 5 years old, maybe a little younger, with sable fur dulled by mud and rain, ribs faintly visible under her thick coat, ears high, amber eyes fixed on Ryan with suspicion sharp enough to cut twine. One side of her muzzle was darker than the other, giving her face a lopsided seriousness, like a school principal who had caught the world cheating. Her paws were muddy. Burrs clung to her tail. She did not wag, she did not bark. She simply watched him as if weighing the entire history of men and finding most of it disappointing. Ryan stayed still. "Morning," he said. The shepherd's ears twitched. She did not appear impressed. "Fair enough," Ryan murmured. "I've heard better speeches too." He reached slowly into his bag and took out half a granola bar. He tossed it gently into the grass between them. The dog looked at the food, then back at him, as if insulted by the simplicity of the bribe. After several seconds, she stepped forward, took the bar, and retreated exactly 3 paces before eating it. Not starving enough to be careless, not trusting enough to be grateful. Ryan respected that. On the other side of town, Helen Brooks had already begun her morning battle with the county office. Helen was 72, narrow-shouldered and straight-backed, with silver-white hair pinned into a loose knot and skin pale from a lifetime spent indoors among books, dust, and stubborn memories. She had been the town librarian for 39 years, and retirement had not softened her. It had simply removed witnesses from her daily arguments. Helen wore a navy raincoat, sensible shoes, and the expression of a woman who had outlived embarrassment but not grief. In her purse was a folded photograph of her mother, Ruth Brooks, standing beside the same rail yard in 1978, with a blue ribbon tied around one wrist. Ruth had been accused, quietly but permanently, of mishandling flood relief money after the great flood of that year. Nobody had ever proved it. Nobody had needed to. Small towns could convict a person with lowered voices and polite nods. Helen had spent decades hating the story, then doubting her mother, then hating herself for the doubt. Now the rail yard was scheduled for demolition, and with it, the last place Ruth had been seen doing anything that looked like hope. Back in the yard, Ryan had returned to his inventory when the German shepherd appeared again, closer this time. He ignored her at first. That was the agreement, he thought. She could distrust him. He could distrust the day. Everybody kept their dignity. Then she darted forward and snatched the white handkerchief hanging from his back pocket. "Hey," Ryan said, standing. The dog bounded away, not panicked, not playful exactly, but purposeful. She stopped 10 yards off and looked back. The handkerchief hung from her mouth like a captured flag. Ryan exhaled. "You've got to be kidding me." The shepherd turned and trotted toward the rear of the yard, not toward the street, not toward the open field, toward the old green train car hidden beyond the grass. Ryan told himself not to follow. A hungry dog stealing cloth did not qualify as a mission. He had no leash, no kennel, no plan, and no appetite for being adopted by a problem with 4 legs and courtroom eyes. But the shepherd stopped again beside the tracks and looked back with such hard, deliberate patience that he felt the old part of him wake, the part trained to notice when an animal was not wandering, but leading. He followed. The grass brushed against his knees. Rain tapped softly on the steel roof of the forgotten car. Up close, the train car looked worse than it had from the gate. Its wooden panels were swollen with age, the iron wheels sunk into mud, the sliding door sealed by rust and time. The shepherd stood before it, dropped the handkerchief at Ryan's boots, and pressed her nose to the lower seam of the door. Ryan crouched. "What is it, girl?" The dog did not answer. Dogs seldom did, which was one of their better qualities. She only stared at the door, body trembling with contained urgency. Ryan looked at the rusted latch, then at the dark gap beneath the car. Nothing moved, no obvious danger, no reason to stay. He picked up his handkerchief, damp now and streaked with mud. "I can't help every lost thing," he said softly. The shepherd turned her head toward him, not pleading, not forgiving, just waiting. Ryan stood and took one step back, then two. From inside the old train car came a sound so small the rain almost carried it away. A thin, broken whimper. Ryan froze. The shepherd's ears lifted. Then the sound came again, not the wind, not the settling of old wood. A puppy. Ryan Cooper did not move at first. The rain thinned into a mist around the old train car, tapping softly against the rusted roof, while the sound from inside faded into the damp silence. He had heard cries before in places where no one should have been alive, and the memory of that knowledge ran through him like cold water. Sadie stood at the sealed door, every line of her thin body pulled tight. The sable German shepherd kept her nose pressed near the lower seam, ears high, amber eyes burning with a kind of command no human language had improved upon. Ryan crouched beside her, careful not to crowd her. "All right," he said quietly. "I hear it too." Sadie glanced at him once, not grateful, not softened, simply confirming that the slow, two-legged creature had finally caught up. Then she faced the door again. The whimper came a second time, smaller now, almost swallowed by the wood and metal. Ryan's chest tightened. Whatever was inside did not have much strength left. The sliding door would not move. Ryan tested the latch and felt rust crumble beneath his fingers, but the frame had swollen and locked itself into place through years of rain, heat, and neglect. He could force some things. This was not one of them. A careless pull could collapse part of the frame inward. He stood, scanned the yard, and pulled out his phone. The county contact list had only 3 names. The first did not answer. The second went straight to voicemail. The third was listed as Thomas Miller, rail maintenance consultant. Ryan called, expecting another dead end. Instead, a rough voice answered on the 4th ring. "If this is about the yard, tell the county I'm retired until someone pays me enough to be annoyed." Ryan explained in clipped sentences. Old car, sealed door, possible animals trapped inside. There was a pause on the line. Then the man's tone changed. "Don't pry the lower hinge, that side's rotten. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up before Ryan could thank him, which Ryan respected. Gratitude was another thing people often made too complicated. Tom Miller arrived in a dented blue pickup that sounded as if it had been assembled from spare parts and stubbornness. He was in his late 60s, short and thick through the shoulders with a square face browned by weather, a gray mustache that drooped over his upper lip, and pale blue eyes made sharp by a lifetime of looking at machines until they confessed what was wrong. His left knee was stiff, so he walked with a slight hitch, but he carried a crowbar, a chain puller, and a canvas tool roll as if they were picnic supplies. Tom had the dry, practical manner of a man who trusted bolts more than promises, though the way he slowed when he saw Sadie told Ryan there was more tenderness in him than he advertised. "That her?" Tom asked. "Looks like it. Looks like she's about ready to take my hand off if I insult her children." Ryan turned toward the dog. Sadie had planted herself between the men and the door, lips lifted just enough to show white teeth. Her growl was low, not wild, but measured. "She doesn't know us," Ryan said. Tom grunted. "Smart lady." It took time. That was the part Ryan hated and trusted most. True rescue usually did not look heroic. It looked like patience, bad weather, and 2 men trying not to make the situation worse. Tom hooked the chain puller to the upper rail while Ryan cleared weeds and broken boards from the base of the door. Sadie watched every movement. Twice she stepped forward, and twice Ryan stopped working until she settled. He spoke to her in a quiet voice, not because he believed words fixed fear, but because tone sometimes built the small bridge over it. "Easy, girl. Nobody's taking them from you. Not today." He did not know why he said them. The promise came out before he could examine it, and promises, once released, had a way of becoming real. A figure appeared near the gate as Tom tightened the chain. Helen Brooks stood beneath a black umbrella, her navy raincoat buttoned to her throat, silver hair pinned back but loosened by the damp air. She had the stern posture of a former librarian who had once frightened noisy children into moral improvement with a single look. Yet there was something fragile around her mouth when she saw the old train car. She did not come too close. She simply stood in the wet grass, one hand pressed against the strap of her purse, watching as if the past might step out and recognize her. Ryan noticed her, but the door groaned before he could speak. "Again?" Tom said. Ryan pulled. Tom leaned his weight into the handle. The rail complained with a long, metal shriek. Rust broke loose in red flakes. Sadie flinched, then lunged toward the opening as the door shifted 3 inches. Ryan caught only a glimpse of darkness inside, but the smell came out immediately. Stale straw, damp wood, old oil, and something warm beneath it all. The animal scent of fear and milk and need. Sadie whined, sharp and broken. Ryan looked at Tom. "More." Tom nodded. The second pull opened a gap wide enough for a man to slip through sideways. Ryan took the flashlight from his bag and ducked inside first. The air was colder within the car, sealed away from the day like a room that had forgotten time. Dust floated in the beam. A broken bench leaned along one wall. Strips of old canvas hung from hooks. Near the far corner, beneath the collapsed edge of the bench and a nest of straw, something moved. Sadie pushed past Ryan, no longer cautious, no longer silent. She scrambled across the floor, paws skidding on dust, and lowered herself over the straw with a sound that was almost a sob. There were 2 puppies. German Shepherd puppies, 6 or 7 weeks old at most, small enough that their paws looked borrowed from toys, their black and tan coats dull with cold and dirt. One had a dark mask across both eyes and a white fleck of straw stuck to his nose. The other was smaller, a little female with tan eyebrows and ears still too soft to decide whether they wanted to stand. They were curled together beneath the bench, trembling so faintly, Ryan almost mistook the motion for the flicker of his flashlight. The male gave the thin whimper Ryan had heard outside. The female did not cry at all, which worried him more. Sadie began licking them frantically, nudging one, then the other, counting with her tongue the way human hands counted rosary beads. She was relieved, yes, but not calm. Her eyes kept snapping back to Ryan and Tom, as if joy itself could be stolen. Ryan knelt slowly, feeling something hard and old loosen behind his ribs. There were very few sights in the world that could make a man feel both powerful and helpless at once. 2 cold puppies under a broken bench were among them. "We need towels," he said, voice rougher than he intended. Tom disappeared and returned with an old flannel blanket from his truck. "Clean enough?" he muttered. "Cleaner than the county budget." Ryan wrapped the smaller puppy first. Sadie's growl rose instantly. Ryan stopped, letting her smell his hand, the blanket, the pup. "I know," he whispered. "I know." He did not know, not really. No man could understand the terror of a mother who had hidden her babies in a dying place and then had to trust strangers because the world had run out of options. But he understood needing help and hating it. That was close enough to respect. Helen had stepped into the doorway now, Her face had gone pale, and not from the cold. She looked past Ryan, past Sadie, past the puppies, toward the interior walls of the car. "This is the one," she said softly. Ryan looked over his shoulder. "What one?" Helen swallowed, her thin hand tightening around the purse strap. "The car my mother worked from during the flood." The words seemed to cost her more than breath. "I was 9. I remember the smell of wet wool and lantern smoke. I remember standing outside because someone said children should not hear grown people cry." Her gaze dropped. "Afterward, people said my mother took money that belongs to the town. They said it politely, which somehow made it worse." Tom shifted uncomfortably. He knew the story. Most of Pine Hollow did. Ryan could see it in the old mechanic's face, in the way his eyes moved away from Helen's. Small towns kept memories the way attics kept old furniture, covered, warped, and never truly gone. Helen stepped back as Ryan lifted the second puppy. Sadie followed so closely that her nose brushed his sleeve. Rain whispered outside. Somewhere beyond the yard a church bell rang, thin and ordinary, as if the world had not just cracked open a forgotten room. Ryan carried the puppies toward the door. The male squirmed weakly in the blanket. The smaller female remained silent, but her tiny chest rose and fell. 2 breaths in the dark, that was all. Sometimes life did not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrived as a nearly missed sound behind rusted steel. As Ryan stepped down from the train car, loose straw slid from the blanket and scattered onto the wet ground. Something else fell with it. A narrow strip of faded blue fabric, stiff with age and dust. It landed beside Helen's shoe. She bent, slowly, as though afraid the earth might take it back, and picked it up between trembling fingers. The color had nearly washed away, but not completely. Helen stared at the ribbon, her lips parted. "My mother wore one just like this," she whispered. By late afternoon, the rain had softened into a cold, gray mist, and Pine Hollow seemed to hold its breath under the low Oregon sky. Ryan Cooper drove slowly through town with Sadie in the back of Tom Miller's pickup and the 2 German Shepherd puppies wrapped in a flannel blanket on his lap. The smaller pup barely moved. The larger one made a weak sound now and then, not a full cry, more like a question asked by something too new to know the world could answer. Ryan kept one hand over the blanket, feeling for breath. In his work, he had learned to count many things: exits, seconds, footsteps, heartbeats under pressure. But counting the tiny rise and fall of a puppy's ribs was worse than any tactical clock. It made him feel clumsy, human, breakable. Sadie stood behind the cab window, muddy paws braced against the truck bed, amber eyes locked on Ryan through the glass. She did not look grateful. She looked like a mother forced to let a stranger carry her heart in a borrowed blanket. Every time the pickup turned, her body shifted with sharp control, refusing to fall, refusing to look away. Ryan understood that kind of vigilance. It was not trust. It was the exhausted edge before trust, where fear had no strength left to keep fighting but still refused to sleep. Pine Hollow Animal Clinic sat at the end of Maple Street, a squat white building with green shutters and a faded sign shaped like a paw print. A row of damp chrysanthemums sagged beside the front step. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, old coffee, and wet fur. Doctor. Laura Hayes came out before Ryan could finish explaining. She was 46, tall and lean, with copper-brown hair pulled into a loose braid and freckled skin that made her look softer than she was. Her eyes were hazel, quick and unsentimental, the eyes of a woman who had seen enough frightened animals to know that panic wasted time. A faint scar crossed the back of her left hand, pale against her skin, from a horse rescue years earlier that people still mentioned and she never did. Laura was kind, but not sweet. Sweetness fluttered. Laura stayed. Examine him too, she said, already reaching for the blanket. And keep the mother close, but not on top of them. Sadie growled when Laura touched the bundle. Ryan shifted instinctively between them, then stopped himself. Sadie did not need a wall. She needed proof. He crouched and let Sadie smell the vet's sleeve, then the blanket, then his hand. She's helping, he said quietly. Same team, girl. Sadie's lips lowered, though her stare remained sharp enough to keep the whole clinic honest. Laura worked with efficient tenderness. The puppies were placed on warmed towels beneath a heat lamp. The larger male had a black mask, a round belly gone too empty, and paws too big for his thin legs. The smaller female was lighter across the cheeks, with tan eyebrows that gave her a permanently worried expression, like a tiny widow at a church supper. Laura checked their gums, temperature, hydration, and breathing. She gave warmed fluids under the skin and a little nutrition by syringe, drop by patient drop. Ryan watched from the corner, arms folded, shoulders tight. He had seen medics fight for lives under worse conditions, but this quiet room somehow asked more of him. There were no orders here, no radio, no clear chain of command. Just two small bodies deciding whether to stay. They have a chance, Laura said at last. The male is stronger. The female worries me, but she is not giving up. She glanced at Sadie. Neither is their mother. Sadie had settled beside the table, but not relaxed. Her muddy coat had begun to dry in stiff patches, and burrs still clung to her tail. She watched every movement, only blinking when the puppies breathed. Laura set down her stethoscope and looked at Ryan. Are they yours? Ryan almost laughed. It would have been easier if the answer were simple. No. She found me. That happens more often than people admit. Laura studied him for a beat. Do you have somewhere they can stay tonight? Ryan looked away. Through the small clinic window, he could see the darkening street, the hardware store closing, an elderly man pulling his collar up against the damp. Pine Hollow was the kind of town that looked harmless, until a man stood still long enough to feel everyone remembering everyone else. There's a rescue in Bend, he said. I can call. They'll know what to do. Laura did not argue. She only lifted one eyebrow. That's one option. It's the responsible one. Sometimes. She began cleaning mud from Sadie's paw with a damp cloth. Sadie tolerated it with queenly resentment. And sometimes responsibility is the word people use when they are trying to leave before something matters. Ryan's jaw tightened. He did not like strangers walking too close to the truth, especially strangers holding cotton balls and speaking calmly. I'm not set up for this. No one ever is, Laura said. That is why towels, coffee, and poor judgment were invented. For the first time that day, Ryan almost smiled. Almost. Then the smaller puppy made a faint squeak, and the moment vanished. Sadie stood immediately, nose lowering to the pup. Laura stepped back to let her. The dog licked the little female twice, slow and careful, then looked at Ryan. Not pleading. Measuring. Asking a question without offering him the comfort of misunderstanding it. Across town, Helen Brooks unlocked the side door of the old public library. The building had been closed for renovations that never seemed to begin, its brick walls dark with rain, its windows clouded by dust. Helen moved through the reading room without turning on all the lights. She knew the place by memory. 39 years of shelving books had made the library less a building than a second rib cage. In the local history room, she opened a metal filing cabinet labeled 1970 to 1985. Her hands shook as she pulled out newspaper clippings, town meeting notes, flood damage reports, and brittle photographs. The flood of 1978 had filled Pine Hollow's streets with brown water and carried away porches, fences, chickens, one piano, and a statue of St. Francis from the church garden that was later found facing backward in a pear tree. People still laughed about the statue. They did not laugh about the money. Helen found the article she remembered. Emergency rail shelter opened for displaced families. There was a blurred photograph of the old train car. Beside it stood several volunteers. One of them was Ruth Brooks, Helen's mother. Dark-haired, slender, serious, with a blue ribbon tied around her wrist. Helen touched the picture. The paper felt thinner than forgiveness. She kept searching. Receipts for blankets, a list of donated canned goods, a town council note approving temporary shelter at the rail yard. Then the file changed. Pages skipped. The relief fund ledger was missing. Not misplaced, not misfiled. Torn out. Helen stared at the empty metal prongs where pages should have been. For 40 years, shame had sat on her family name like a crow on a fence. Now, for the first time, the crow looked less like truth and more like theft. That evening, Ryan carried blankets into the clinic's recovery room. Laura had allowed Sadie and the puppies to stay overnight in a heated kennel large enough for all three, though Sadie refused to enter until Ryan placed the puppies inside himself. The mother dog stepped in after them, turned twice, and lay down with her body curved around both pups. The male found milk. The female needed help, but Laura guided her gently until she latched for a few seconds. Those few seconds changed the room. Even Ryan felt it. Hope did not arrive grandly. It arrived with a mouthful of milk and a tired dog closing one eye. "You should get some sleep," Laura said from the doorway. Ryan sat in a metal chair beside the kennel. "I will." "You are a terrible liar." "I've been better." "I doubt it." When Laura left, the clinic settled into its nighttime sounds. The hum of the heater, the soft clink of pipes, the distant bark of a boarded dog dreaming of heroic mailmen. Ryan leaned back, but he did not sleep. He watched Sadie watch him. The German shepherd's eyes softened only when she looked at her puppies. With him, she remained undecided. Ryan found that strangely fair. Too much affection too quickly always felt like a salesman at the door. Near midnight, Sadie lifted her head. Ryan sat forward. The puppies slept against her belly, warm beneath the lamp. Nothing in the room had changed, yet the dog rose carefully, stepped out of the kennel, and moved to the window. She stared through the dark glass toward the far end of town, toward the abandoned rail yard. A low whine trembled in her throat. Ryan followed her gaze. The old train car was out there in the rain, sealed again in darkness, waiting. Sadie looked back at him once, and Ryan understood, with a heaviness that settled deep in his chest, that the mother dog had not led him there only to save her puppies. Something else remained inside that forgotten car. Something she wanted him to find. By the next morning, Pine Hollow had traded rain for a pale, reluctant sun, the kind that seemed embarrassed to be seen after so much gray weather. The streets still shone with puddles, and the gutters carried pine needles, cigarette butts, and small yellow leaves toward drains that had not been properly cleaned since before half the town council needed reading glasses. Ryan Cooper stood inside the recovery room of Pine Hollow Animal Clinic, watching Sadie pace between the heated kennel and the window. The two puppies slept beneath the lamp, their tiny sides rising and falling with more confidence than the night before. The male had already learned that warm milk was one of the better arguments for staying alive. The smaller female still looked fragile, but when Dr. Laura Hayes placed a finger near her paw, the pup curled her toes around it as if signing a very small contract with the world. Sadie should have been resting. Instead, the German shepherd turned from the window, crossed to Ryan, stared at him, then looked back toward the far end of town. She did it 3 times. By the 4th, Ryan rubbed both hands over his face. "You know," he muttered, "most people just bark when they want something." Sadie's amber eyes did not soften. Laura, standing near the medicine cabinet with her copper-brown braid over one shoulder and a coffee cup in hand, watched the exchange with the professional calm of a woman who had spent years seeing animals make fools of intelligent men. "She wants to go back," Laura said. "She can't leave the pups." "For an hour, she can. They're warm, fed, and I'll be here. Besides, if you don't take her, she'll wear a trench through my floor." Ryan looked at the sleeping puppies, then at Sadie. "This is a bad idea." Laura lifted one eyebrow. "Most useful ideas start that way." Ryan borrowed a leash, though Sadie behaved as if the leash were a ceremonial insult rather than a tool. She did not pull wildly. She led with purpose, head low, body still thin beneath the muddy sable coat Laura had only partly cleaned. Ryan drove Tom Miller's old pickup back through town while Sadie sat upright in the passenger seat, ears forward, refusing to enjoy the ride. At a red light, a woman pushing a stroller smiled at the dog. Sadie ignored her. Ryan almost apologized on Sadie's behalf, then decided the dog was entitled to her standards. The rail yard appeared beyond the last houses, quieter in daylight, but no less watchful. Helen Brooks was already there, standing just inside the gate with a large manila envelope held against her chest. Her silver-white hair was pinned more carefully than yesterday, but her face looked as if she had slept badly, or not at all. She wore the same navy raincoat and sensible shoes, now muddy around the soles. A woman like Helen did not arrive at a place such as this by accident. She arrived carrying witnesses, even if the witnesses were made of paper. "I thought you might come back," Helen said. Her voice was controlled, but one hand worried the edge of the envelope. Ryan opened the truck door. Sadie jumped down before he could help and went straight toward the train car. She did not glance at the corner where her puppies had been found. That alone made Ryan stop. Yesterday, every nerve in her body had pointed toward that nest under the broken bench. Today, she passed it without slowing, crossed the length of the car, and sat before the rear wall. The wall was made of vertical planks darkened by age, but one section near the bottom had been painted over more heavily than the rest. The green paint there was thicker, uneven, as though someone had tried to hide a scar beneath makeup and lacked both skill and patience. Sadie touched her nose to it, then looked back at Ryan. "No," Ryan said immediately. "We are not doing another mystery today." Sadie remained seated. Helen stepped into the train car behind him. The light from the open door thinned as it reached the rear, catching dust in slow golden threads. She looked around with the expression of someone walking through a room inside her own memory, and discovering that memory had rearranged the furniture. "I brought something," she said. From the envelope she removed a black and white photograph, its corners soft with age. Ryan took it carefully. In the image, the same train car stood in flood mud, its wheels half buried, its open door crowded with women, children, blankets, and boxes. Near the left side stood a slender woman in her 30s, with dark hair pinned at the nape of her neck, sharp cheekbones, tired eyes, and a blue ribbon tied around her wrist. She was not smiling. She looked focused, almost severe, like someone who had learned that compassion required more organization than sentiment. "That's my mother," Helen said. "Ruth Brooks." Ryan studied the photo. "She looks like she ran a place." "She probably did." Helen gave a short, humorless laugh. "Ruth could organize a pantry, a church supper, and a minor apocalypse before breakfast. People came to her when things fell apart. Then after the flood, they said she took money meant for families who had lost everything." Her mouth trembled once before she steadied it. "I wanted to believe her. I did. But I was 9 years old. Adults whispered. Friends stopped coming over. Teachers became too kind. Do you know how heavy kindness can feel when everyone believes your family is dirty?" Ryan did know in his own way. Pity had a taste. It tasted like cold coffee and rooms where people lowered their voices when he entered. Helen looked down at the photograph. Some days I thought she must have done it, because surely a whole town could not be wrong. A long silence followed. That was the worst part, not their doubt. Mine. Sadie scratched once at the painted wall. The sound cut through the air. Ryan felt irritation rise, sudden and unreasonable. He had slept in a clinic chair. He had counted puppy breaths all night. He had listened to an old woman confess a wound that had taken 40 years to find language. He did not want another hidden thing. Hidden things made demands. Hidden things rearranged lives. Enough, he said, too sharply. Sadie froze. Helen looked at him. Ryan exhaled, ashamed. The dog had not caused his exhaustion. Neither had Helen. He crouched near Sadie, lowering his voice. Sorry, girl. I'm tired. That's not your fault. Sadie watched him for a second, and turned back to the wall, apparently accepting the apology without offering absolution. Ryan ran his fingers over the planks. Most were rough, dry, splintered. The painted section felt different, smoother along the edges. Newer. Not new, but newer than the rest, perhaps added after the photograph had been taken. He tapped it with his knuckles. The sound came back dull, but not solid. A pocket of air waited behind it. His annoyance faded, replaced by the old alertness. Not fear. Recognition. Something had been covered on purpose. He pulled a folding knife from his pocket and scored the paint around one plank. Then he fetched Tom's pry bar from the truck because apparently Ryan Cooper's life now included obeying German shepherds and borrowing tools from retired mechanics. The first plank resisted. The second cracked slightly near the top. Helen flinched at the sound, as if the wall itself had cried out. Ryan worked slowly, careful not to destroy whatever might be behind it. Sadie stood close enough that her whiskers brushed his sleeve. Back up, he told her. She did not. Of course not. At last, the plank loosened with a soft, wooden sigh. Behind it was not wrought or insulation. It was a narrow, hollow space between the outer boards and the inner frame, just large enough for a small box. Ryan reached in and touched metal. He drew out an old tin box, rectangular and rust-speckled, the kind that might once have held sewing needles or Christmas cookies. Around it was tied a faded blue ribbon, stiff with age but still holding its knot. Dust clung to the lid. Ryan set it on the floor between them. Helen sank slowly to her knees, one hand pressed to her mouth. The ribbon in the photograph, the ribbon in the straw, and now this. 3 echoes forming one voice. Ryan brushed the grime from the lid with his thumb. Words appeared, faint but readable, scratched into the metal by a careful hand. For those who needed shelter. Ryan Cooper did not open the tin box inside the train car. Some instinct stopped him, the same old inner voice that had once told him not to step into a room before checking the corners. Instead, he wrapped the box in his jacket, carried it out through the wet grass, and drove with Helen Brooks to the closed library, Sadie sitting stiffly in the back seat as if appointed by heaven to supervise all human decisions. The 2 puppies remained at the clinic under Dr. Laura Hayes's care, warm beneath a lamp, breathing more steadily now. Ryan should have felt relieved. Instead, the tin box on the truck seat seemed to pull all the air toward itself. Helen said nothing during the drive. Her hands rested in her lap, thin fingers knotted together, and every few seconds she looked at the box as if it might either save her mother or wound her one final time. The old library smelled of dust, floor wax, and rain-damp wool. Helen unlocked the local history room and switched on a green-shaded desk lamp. Its light spread across the table like a small island in a dark sea. Ryan placed the tin box in the center. Sadie sat near the door, muddy tail curled around her feet, watching Helen with wary interest. The German shepherd had accepted Ryan's presence, but not his authority. That difference mattered. Trust, Ryan was beginning to understand, was not a door swinging open. It was a porch light left on, uncertain whether the visitor deserved warmth. Helen touched the blue ribbon but did not untie it at once. "My mother tied ribbons around everything," she said. "Bundles of letters, mason jars, Christmas gifts." Even tools, once, because she said men always lost the useful things and then blamed the furniture. Her mouth curved briefly and painfully. "My father pretended to be offended. Then he asked her where the hammer was." Ryan said nothing. He had learned that grief often brought its own little jokes, like wildflowers growing through cracked pavement. At last, Helen loosened the knot. The ribbon came free with a faint rasp. Inside the box lay a ledger wrapped in wax paper. Several folded letters, old pharmacy receipts, bus tickets, ration cards from local churches, and a bundle of small envelopes tied with thread. The ledger cover was blue cloth, faded almost gray at the corners. Helen opened it with the care of a woman handling a sleeping bird. The first page bore Ruth Brooks' handwriting, neat and firm. "Relief received must become shelter given." Beneath that was a date from 1978. Ryan leaned closer. Page after page listed names, amounts, places, and needs. Not the cold accounting of theft, but the careful map of a quiet rescue. A widow named Margaret Ellis had received 2 weeks of medicine and coal. A young mother named Janie Bell had been given a bus ticket to Salem with 3 children and no forwarding address. A farmhand named Luis Ortega had received work boots, dry blankets, and cash to replace tools washed away by the flood. There were notes beside some names. "Do not speak to husband. Leave food behind church. Child has fever. Elderly couple refuses help if called charity. Tell Mr. C it is payment for his old repairs." Ryan read the lines slowly, feeling the room change around him. "She hid them," Helen whispered. "Not the money, the people." Ryan nodded. He could see it now. Ruth had not been sloppy. She had been careful, careful enough to protect the ashamed, the frightened, the proud, and the trapped. The kind of people a town claimed to love in public but judged in private. Ryan had known people like that. Men who limped away from wars no one could see, women who smiled while carrying houses on their backs, children who learned silence before spelling. The ledger was not a confession, it was a shelter built from ink. Helen turned another page. A small letter slipped out and landed near Ryan's hand. The paper had yellowed, and the words were written in uneven, childlike script. Ryan picked it up before thinking. It read, "Thank you for not making me explain what I was not brave enough to say." The sentence struck him so suddenly that he had to look away. For a moment the library dissolved, not into a battlefield, not into noise, into a kitchen in Boise years earlier, where his younger sister Megan Cooper had stood barefoot by the sink in an oversized sweater, dark hair falling loose around a face too pale for her age. Megan had been 29, small-boned and sharp-witted, the kind of woman who could make a grocery list sound like a courtroom argument. She had loved sunflowers, terrible television mysteries, and sending Ryan voice messages at inconvenient times. Her laugh used to arrive before the punchline, ruining her own jokes and somehow making them better. In the last year of her life, that laugh had thinned. Ryan had heard it. He had noticed. He had also been busy, deployed, exhausted, certain there would be time. There had been calls he did not answer, messages he saved for later, a final voicemail he still had not listened to all the way through. She had not begged. That was the part that haunted him. She had simply asked to hear his voice. Ryan had spent years believing rescue meant arriving under fire. He had not understood that sometimes rescue was returning a call before the silence hardened. Helen noticed his face but did not press. That mercy made him grateful and ashamed at once. Sadie rose quietly and crossed the room. She did not nuzzle him. She was not sentimental enough for that. She simply sat beside his chair, close enough that her shoulder touched his boot. Ryan looked down at her scarred, muddy face. "You don't make anything easy, do you?" he murmured. Sadie blinked once, as if easy had never been the point. They continued reading. The missing relief money had gone everywhere except into Ruth's pocket. Blankets, milk, fuel, medicine, train fare, temporary rooms, envelopes marked only with initials. Ruth had written explanations in the margins, sometimes practical, sometimes fiercely human. Pride can starve a person as surely as hunger. Do not ask Mrs. Hale why her boy flinches. Help first, questions later, if ever. Helen pressed a hand over her mouth, but tears escaped anyway. "All these years," she said. "I let them make her smaller?" "No," Ryan said quietly. "They tried. That's different." Before Helen could answer, an engine growled outside. Not a passing car, something larger. Ryan stood and moved to the window. A white pickup with the logo Whitaker Demolition rolled up beside the rail yard gate across the street. Behind it came a flatbed carrying cutting equipment. A man stepped out, broad and heavy-set, somewhere in his early 50s, with a shaved head, a close gray beard, and a face weathered by sun, debt, and too many early mornings. His orange safety vest was clean, but his boots were caked with mud. He carried himself like a man who had once been gentle, and then misplaced the habit. Gary Whitaker was known in Pine Hollow as efficient, blunt, and not cruel unless delay cost money. Ryan stepped outside with the ledger under his arm. Helen followed, the blue ribbon clutched in one hand. Gary looked at them, then toward the old train car. "County moved the schedule up," he said. "We start cutting tomorrow morning." Helen went very still. Ryan felt the ledger's weight against his ribs. Paper, ink, names, truth. So little armor for something so important. Gary glanced at the box. "Whatever you found, take it home tonight." Ryan looked past him to the rusted train car, then down at Sadie, who had come to stand beside him in the wet grass, eyes fixed on the same door she had refused to abandon. If he stayed silent now, Ruth Brooks would disappear again, this time under saw teeth and scrap metal. And Ryan knew with a quietness that frightened him more than danger that he had already waited too long in one life. He would not do it again. By evening, the old rail yard had become a courtroom, with no judge, only wet gravel, rusted tracks, and a train car that seemed to wait with the patience of an old witness. Ryan Cooper stood across from Gary Whitaker beside the locked gate, the blue ledger tucked under one arm, and Sadie sitting at his left boot like a silent verdict. The sky over Pine Hollow had turned the color of pewter, and the first lights in town blinked on one by one, small squares of warmth in a valley that suddenly felt colder than it had that morning. Gary's white demolition truck idled behind him, coughing diesel into the damp air. He had the broad, tired body of a man who had carried too many bills in his shirt pocket and too many apologies behind his teeth. His shaved head shone faintly under the yard light. His gray beard was trimmed close, and his eyes were not cruel, which made the whole thing harder. Cruel men were simple. Tired men were not. "I'm asking for 1 week," Ryan said. Gary rubbed the back of his neck. "You can ask for the moon, too, but I still can't load it on a flatbed." He looked toward the old train car. "County signed the papers. My crew is scheduled. The equipment is rented. I delay, I pay." Helen Brooks stood beside Ryan, thin and upright in her navy raincoat, clutching the faded blue ribbon as though it were the last thread holding her mother to the earth. "That car is part of our flood history," she said. Gary's face tightened. "With respect, Miss Brooks, everything in this town is part of somebody's history. The feed store, the mill office, the old pool hall. History doesn't cover payroll." Sadie gave a low rumble at her chest. Gary glanced at her and took one careful step back. "And I don't argue with mothers," he muttered. Ryan might have laughed on another day, not this one. They followed Gary to the small trailer office near the edge of the property, where he spread the contract on a metal desk under a buzzing fluorescent light. The trailer smelled of coffee, damp paperwork, and machine grease. A framed photo sat beside the phone. Gary with an elderly woman in a wheelchair, both of them squinting into bright summer sun. Gary noticed Ryan looking. "My mother," he said, softer than before. "Agnes Whitaker, 81. Small woman, white curls, hands twisted up from arthritis. Still mean enough to correct my grammar from 3 rooms away. She needs home care now. Insurance covers the polite part. The rest is on me." He tapped the contract. "So when folks say, 'Just wait, Gary,' what I hear is, 'Tell your mother to wait, too.'" The words did not excuse him, but they made him human. And Ryan hated how often humans stood on opposite sides of a wound without knowing who had placed it there. "This isn't scrap," Ryan said, opening the ledger. "Ruth Brooks used that car as a shelter. The missing relief money went to people who needed help quietly." Gary glanced at the pages but did not touch them. "Then take it to the county clerk." "Tonight?" "No clerk tonight." "Then delay tomorrow." Gary closed his eyes for half a second. "I can't. Not without an order. Not without the county. Not because a ledger appears in a cookie tin after 40 years. Helen flinched. Ryan felt his own temper rise, then held it down. Anger was a match. This place was already full of dry wood. At the library, Helen began making calls. She sat at the local history room desk beneath the green lamp, a phone book open beside her, her reading glasses low on her nose. Her voice shook during the first call. By the third, it steadied. Ryan stood near the window while Sadie rested in the corner, though the dog never fully slept. "Mrs. Collins, this is Helen Brooks, Ruth's daughter. I'm sorry to disturb you." A pause. Helen's jaw tightened. "Yes? That Ruth?" The first person hung up. The second said she did not remember. The third remembered too much and cried before she could speak. May Collins was 79, a round-faced widow with soft white hair and a voice like tissue paper rubbed between fingers. She told Helen that Ruth had given her mother dry socks, soup, and a place to sleep in the train car after the flood took their trailer. "She told Mama not to be ashamed," May whispered through the receiver. "I remember that. I was only a girl, but I remember the blue ribbon on her wrist." Later, Walter Price answered, 84, a retired postman with a gravelly voice and a suspicious nature sharpened by age. He admitted Ruth had sent him to deliver envelopes after dark. "Wouldn't say what was in them," Walter said. "But folks ate the next day, that much I know." Helen wrote everything down, names, dates, fragments. The old shame that had lived like a locked room inside her seemed to gain windows, one by one. Still, not everyone helped. One woman said, "Leave it buried." One man claimed Ruth had made a mess of proper accounting, as if human suffering preferred tidy columns. Helen thanked them anyway. After one call, she set the receiver down and pressed both hands over her face. Ryan did not tell her it would be all right. People said that when they wanted pain to become quieter for their own comfort. Instead, he placed a cup of coffee beside her. She lowered her hands and gave him a tired look. "You military men always think coffee is medicine." "No," Ryan said. "Sometimes it's a bandage." Helen laughed once, a small, cracked sound that did more good than any speech. Near midnight, Ryan returned to the clinic to check on the puppies. Dr. Laura Hayes met him in the recovery room, wearing a faded green sweater under her white coat, her copper braid loosened, her eyes tired but alert. "The little female nursed twice," she said. "That is not a guarantee, but it is a very fine argument." The 2 puppies slept against a warm towel. the male's paw draped over his sister's back like a tiny oath. Sadie sniffed them carefully, licked each head, then looked toward the door again. Laura followed the dog's gaze. "Still the train car?" Ryan nodded. "Still the train car." Laura studied him for a moment. "You know you're allowed to care, right? It doesn't make you reckless." Ryan looked down at the puppies. "In my experience, caring gives the world a better target." Laura's expression softened, but she did not pity him. He appreciated that. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it gives you something worth standing in front of." The words followed him back to the rail yard. By then the town had gone dark, and the old train car sat under a bruised moon, damp and silent. Ryan sat inside with a flashlight, the ledger, and the tin box, while Sadie lay near the door, her ears twitching at every sound. He called the county emergency line and left a message. He photographed every ledger page. He wrote down witness names. He tried to build a wall out of evidence before morning arrived with saw blades. But sometime after midnight, exhaustion found the cracks in him. He took out his phone and opened Megan's last voicemail. His thumb hovered over the screen for a long time, then he played it. Her voice filled the dark, small and familiar, a ghost carrying sunflowers. "Hey, Dan. I know you're busy. I just wanted to hear your voice when you get a minute. No emergency." "Don't make that face. I can hear you making that face." There was a faint laugh, tired but still hers. "Call me when you can." The message ended. Ryan sat very still. No emergency. That was how people disappeared sometimes. Politely, carefully, not wanting to be a burden. Sadie rose and came to sit beside him, shoulder touching his knee. Again, no comfort show, no grand affection. Just presence. The kind that stayed. Near dawn, while returning the letters to the tin box, Ryan noticed a false bottom beneath the wax paper. He worked it loose with his pocket knife. Something small rolled into his palm. A brass train whistle, darkened with age, tied with a narrow strip of blue ribbon. Beneath it was a final note in Ruth Brooks's firm hand. "Each evening, one whistle means the car is safe. Come before the water rises." Ryan held the whistle as the first gray light touched the train car walls. Outside, the demolition equipment waited like iron animals. Inside, the past had finally handed him a voice. He closed his fingers around the brass and looked at Sadie. "All right," he whispered. "Let's wake the town." Morning arrived with no mercy for unfinished prayers. A hard white light spread over Pine Hollow, bright enough to make every puddle shine and every lie look newly polished. The rail yard, usually ignored by passing drivers, had become the busiest place in town before breakfast. Gary Whitaker's crew rolled in first with 2 trucks, a portable generator, cutting torches, orange cones, and the weary silence of men paid by the hour to take things apart. Gary stepped down from his white pickup, wearing the same orange safety vest, his shaved head bare to the cold, his gray beard combed, but his eyes heavy. He had not slept much. Ryan could tell by the way Gary kept rubbing one thumb across the calluses in his palm, as if trying to smooth out a decision already made rough. To Gary, this was a job. A painful one, maybe, but still a job. To Ryan Cooper, standing in front of the old train car with Sadie beside him, it looked like a funeral scheduled by people who had never met the dead. Ryan had not come armed with anything except paper, witnesses, and one brass whistle darkened by time. He wore the same faded green jacket, though he had shaved before dawn with cold water in the clinic bathroom, an old habit from years when appearing steady mattered, even when a man felt split open inside. Sadie sat at his left side, thinner than she should have been, but straighter than most citizens of Pine Hollow managed on their best day. Her sable coat had been brushed by Dr. Laura Hayes, though one stubborn burr still clung to her tail like an elderly aunt refusing to leave after Thanksgiving dinner. Behind Ryan, in a wicker laundry basket lined with heated towels, the 2 German Shepherd puppies slept under Laura's watch. The larger male occasionally twitched his paws. The smaller female was wrapped in soft fleece, her little face no longer quite so gray with weakness. Laura stood near them in a wool coat over her clinic clothes, copper braid tucked into her collar, one hand resting on the basket as if it were a sacred vessel. Helen Brooks arrived, carrying Ruth's ledger against her chest. The 72-year-old former librarian looked smaller in the open yard, but not weaker. Her silver hair was pinned tightly, her navy raincoat buttoned, her lips pressed into a line that had survived 4 decades of whispers. Tom Miller came next, limping through the gate with 2 thermoses of coffee and a face that suggested he would rather wrestle a locomotive than attend a public emotional event. Then came May Collins, round-faced and bundled in a rose-colored coat, her white hair tucked under a knitted hat. Walter Price followed in a brown cap, leaning on a cane, suspicious of the morning and everyone in it. A few others drifted in, drawn by Helen's calls, by rumor, by the sight of demolition trucks, by that old human instinct to gather where something might finally be said aloud. Gary looked at the small crowd and sighed. "Ryan, don't do this in front of my crew." "I'm not stopping your crew," Ryan said quietly. Gary glanced at Sadie. "Could have fooled me." Ryan took the brass whistle from his pocket. The blue ribbon tied around it stirred in the wind. For a second, he saw Megan's name on his phone, the calls he had saved for later, the silence that later had become. He lifted the whistle to his lips and blew. The sound was not pretty. It cracked through the rail yard like the cry of an old bird waking under snow. It was thin, brass, worn, and imperfect, yet it carried. It crossed the rusted tracks, bounced off the freight shed, slipped through the gate and into the street beyond. One worker lowered his torch before lighting it. Another turned off the generator. Even Gary froze, his face tightening, as if the sound had found some locked room in his own chest. Helen opened the ledger. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She read Ruth Brooks' words. Relief received must become shelter given. She read names, not all of them, only those whose families had already agreed. She read about blankets bought after midnight, medicine delivered without signatures, food left where pride would not be wounded by witnesses. May Collins stepped forward, dabbing her eyes with a folded tissue. "My mama was one of them," she said. "We had nowhere after the flood. Ruth gave us soup in that car, chicken soup, too much pepper. I remember because Mama said only a holy woman or a lunatic would season soup like that during a disaster." A nervous laugh moved through the crowd, softening nothing and somehow making everything bearable. Walter Price cleared his throat. "I carried envelopes for Ruth," he said, staring at his cane rather than the people. "Didn't ask questions. Should have, maybe. Or maybe I should have answered some when folks started talking later." His gravelly voice grew lower. "I was ashamed, because I needed money once too. People remember receiving help as if it were a crime. That is a foolish kind of pride, but I had it." One by one, others spoke. A woman remembered a blanket around her grandmother's shoulders. A man remembered Ruth sending his father work boots after the flood took the tool shed. Some memories were clear, some were ragged, but together they formed a bridge sturdy enough for truth to cross. Then Helen handed Ryan a folded photocopy from the county archive. Ryan passed it to Gary. "This was the report that blamed the missing funds on Ruth," Ryan said. "Look at the signature." Gary took the paper with a frown. His eyes moved down the page. When he saw the name, the color drained from his face. Benjamin Whitaker, his father, former Relief Committee treasurer, a man Gary had spent his childhood admiring from the safe distance of polished shoes, clean ledgers, and church handshakes. Gary swallowed hard. He signed this? Helen's voice was quiet. He signed what the town chose to believe. Gary looked toward the train car. For once, he had no answer ready. The blunt, practical man, the man of schedules and invoices, stood very still while the past leaned its full weight against him. Ryan did not press. Neither did Helen. Some truths did not need a hammer. They needed room to land. A county SUV pulled up beside the gate. Council Chair Patricia Lowell stepped out, a 64-year-old woman with a short gray-blonde bob, a compact body, and the careful expression of someone who had spent 20 years learning how to make difficult decisions sound procedural. She wore a camel coat and carried a leather folder under one arm. Patricia was known for moving slowly, not because she lacked courage, but because she feared mistakes that could not be unmade. She listened while Helen read the key pages. She listened while May and Walter spoke again. She studied the photograph of Ruth, the blue ribbon, the ledger, the whistle, and finally the two puppies sleeping in the basket at the foot of the car. At last, Patricia turned to Gary. "Shut it down for today." Gary looked at his trucks, then at the report in his hand. Then at the old train car. His jaw worked once. "Kill the equipment," he told his crew. The generator died. The sudden quiet felt enormous. Patricia lifted her phone. "I'm calling an emergency council review. Until then, nothing is to be cut, moved, burned, hauled, or conveniently misplaced." Tom Miller gave a satisfied grunt. "That's government talk for don't touch it," he whispered to Laura. Laura murmured, "Miracles do come in boring packaging." Helen stood facing the train car, the ledger held against her heart. Nothing had been restored. Not her childhood, not Ruth's reputation in all the years it had been left to rot, not the dinners where neighbors had gone quiet when Helen entered. But the silence had cracked. Her mother's name had finally been allowed back into daylight. Ryan felt Sadie shift beside him. The German Shepherd leaned slowly, deliberately, until her head rested against his leg. Not dramatically, not like surrender, like a tired mother granting a tired soldier one small piece of trust. Ryan looked down at her, and for once, he did not step away. By early autumn, Pine Hollow had learned to look at the old rail yard without lowering its eyes. The air had turned crisp, carrying the smell of cedar smoke, damp leaves, and apples from the orchard beyond the church hill. The rusted tracks still led nowhere, at least on a map, but people came down them now as if following a path back into themselves. The old train car no longer sagged behind weeds like a guilty memory. Its green sides had been repaired but not made too pretty. Tom Miller had insisted on that. "A scar sanded smooth stops telling the truth," he had said, standing there with his gray mustache full of sawdust and the authority of a man who believed wood deserved honesty. So the dents remained. The old hinges remained. Even one section of the wall, where Ryan had found the tin box, had been framed behind glass instead of hidden again. A hand-carved sign hung beside the sliding door. Blue Ribbon Boxcar. Beneath it, in smaller letters, was Ruth Brooks' name, followed by a simple sentence Helen had written after 3 sleepless attempts. She kept the door open when the water rose. Helen Brooks had stood in front of that sign the first morning it was mounted, 72 years old, silver hair pinned neatly beneath a blue scarf, shoulders narrow but upright. She did not weep loudly. Helen was not built for public collapse. Instead, one tear ran down her cheek, and she wiped it away with the brisk irritation of a woman offended by her own face. Ryan saw it and said nothing. Some grief deserved privacy, even in daylight. The town council had voted to preserve the boxcar after the emergency review uncovered enough records, testimonies, and missing pages to make the old accusation against Ruth impossible to defend. There was no parade at first, no grand apology wrapped in brass music. The truth arrived awkwardly through corrected minutes, a local newspaper article, a county archive update, and neighbors who began stopping Helen at the grocery store with clumsy sentences. "Your mother was a good woman," they would say, as if returning a borrowed dish 40 years late. Helen accepted the words, though not always warmly. Forgiveness, she told Ryan once, was not a vending machine. People could not insert an apology and expect peace to drop out wrapped in cellophane. The blue ribbon boxcar became more than a memorial. Shelves along one wall held canned food, blankets, socks, dog kibble, and small envelopes of grocery cards. A table near the door displayed copies of Ruth's ledger, the old photograph, and the brass whistle tied with its faded ribbon. On Saturday mornings, Helen hosted letter readings. People brought old notes, flood memories, family stories, and sometimes only silence. Helen read what they could not. Her voice, once sharpened by shame, had grown steadier, not softer exactly. Helen Brooks would never be mistaken for a bowl of pudding. But something in her had unclenched. Gary Whittaker kept his distance for the first month. Then, without asking for attention, he began building a wooden ramp from the gravel path to the boxcar door. Gary was still broad and blunt, his shaved head usually hidden under a work cap, his gray beard fuller now, his orange demolition vest replaced by a brown canvas jacket. He worked early, before most visitors arrived. When Ryan asked if he wanted help, Gary only said, "Hold the far end and don't make a speech." The ramp was for Agnes Whittaker, Gary's 81-year-old mother, who came one clear afternoon in a wheelchair with a quilt over her lap. Agnes was small and bird-boned, with white curls, sharp blue eyes, and arthritic hands curled like old roots. She stared at Ruth's photograph for a long time. Then she looked at her son and said, "Your father always did hate being wrong." Gary's mouth tightened. "He wasn't just wrong, Ma." Agnes nodded slowly. "No, but you can be different. That's the part still alive." Gary turned away, pretending to check a screw on the ramp. Nobody teased him about it, not even Tom, which proved the town had developed some manners after all. Ryan Cooper rented a small yellow house 2 streets from the rail yard, close enough that he could hear the church bell and, on windy nights, the soft groan of the tracks. He had intended to leave after the review. He had even packed, twice. Both times, Sadie sat by the door and watched him with the disappointed patience of a mother waiting for a child to stop lying. The German shepherd had filled out by then, her sable coat brushed clean, her amber eyes still suspicious of sudden affection and delivery men. The puppies grew into round-bellied chaos. Ryan named the male Scout because he investigated everything, including laundry baskets, rain gutters, and one unfortunate pumpkin pie cooling on Laura Hayes's windowsill. The smaller female became June because she had survived long enough to deserve a summer name. June remained delicate but determined, with soft tan eyebrows and a habit of sleeping on Ryan's boots whenever she believed he might leave. Ryan was not healed. He disliked that word when people used it as if a wounded soul were a fence post needing one good nail. He still woke some nights with his heart racing. He still let Megan's final voicemail sit at the top of his phone, though now he could listen to it without breaking apart. Sometimes he sat on the porch after midnight while Sadie lay beside him and he would say his sister's name into the dark, not to summon ghosts, but to stop hiding from them. Staying, he discovered, was not one brave decision. It was 100 small decisions made while coffee brewed, dogs shed on the furniture, and the world remained stubbornly unfinished. On an amber afternoon near the end of October, the town gathered for the first annual Blue Ribbon Day. Nothing about it was elegant. A folding table leaned to one side. Tom burned the first batch of hot dogs and blamed the grill with the solemn injustice of a man betrayed by machinery. Laura handed out adoption flyers beside a basket of donated pet food. Gary pushed Agnes up the ramp himself. Helen stood by the boxcar door, holding Ruth's brass whistle. Ryan stood nearby with Sadie at his feet. Scout and June tumbled around the wooden steps, all paws, ears, and reckless joy. Helen lifted the whistle and blew once. The sound crossed the rail yard, thin and imperfect, moving over repaired wood, old iron, pine trees, and people who had finally learned to listen. No one there was completely restored. Helen had not been given back the years her mother's name was bent under rumor. Gary had not undone his father's signature. Ryan had not become a man without ghosts. But the boxcar breathed again. Sadie rested her head against Ryan's leg, and this time Ryan placed his hand gently between her ears. The tracks still led nowhere. And somehow, everyone knew that was no longer true. Maybe the miracle in this story was not thunder from the sky or a door opening by itself. Maybe it was quieter than that. A hungry mother dog refusing to give up, a soldier choosing to listen, an old woman brave enough to uncover a painful truth, and a town learning that silence can wound just as deeply as a lie. In everyday life, we often walk past people, memories, and small cries for help because we are tired, busy, or afraid of getting involved. But God often works through the smallest nudges, a sound we almost ignore, a kindness we almost withhold, a truth we almost leave buried. Ryan did not fix everything in one day, and neither do we. But he stayed long enough for grace to begin its work. And sometimes that is where healing starts, not in perfection, but in choosing not to walk away. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes loyalty still matters. Leave a comment below, subscribe for more stories, and may God bless you and keep you safe wherever you are watching from.